Welcome back to another Adventure Box podcast. This is Zach Edwards with Historical Conquest, and we're going to go into some things that are very exciting and so misunderstood. I cannot believe how misunderstood these things are. Okay, so first off, we're going to talk about some main explorers that are coming from the known world, being Europe, over to the new world, being the Americas. So I was interested in some of the charts. I wanted to use them for our YouTube channel. I wanted to show people what they're like, the charts that we have. Come to find out, they are so poor. I mean, I typed in Amerigo Vespucci, and it would give me routes of Columbus, or it would give me routes of another explorer. I'm like, wait a second, what? Or I wrote in Amerigo Vespucci routes, and it would give me the routes going up into places like around the Gulf and around Florida and then home again. I'm like, wait, no. Why are we getting this stuff on in the internet? Why is it so poor that we do not have actual like understanding of history? No, Amerigo Vespucci is not the same person as Columbus. Columbus is not the same person as Amerigo Vespucci. But today, we're going to be talking about three people that are very important. Three people. The first one, the person that the country was actually named after, Amerigo Vespucci. The next one is also very important. This one is Pedro Alvarez Cabral. Cabral is very, very, very important because he's one that's basically credited with discovering Brazil and then also making it all the way to India, which was a huge feat at this point. And then we're going to be talking about Juan Ponce de Leon. And if you learn about Juan Ponce de Leon, you would hear that, oh, he was the one that went for the fountain of youth. Yes, true. That was part of the interest for him, but that was not the actual reason for him to explore. We're going to go all into that today. So let me introduce you to someone that I'm going to bring up a map of the world. Again, if you don't have the YouTube channel, it's totally fine. This is just as good with the podcast. What's important to understand is that the United States not the United States, the Americas, being North and South America and Central America, are very separate from Africa and Europe. I mean, there's a large divide between the two. But come to find out, when you actually try to go around Africa, if you get hit with a really bad storm, you can be blown off so far that you'd actually make it to Brazil before being able to make your way back to Africa. Really? Yeah. It's that interesting that so many things are driven by tides when it comes to the way that people travel. When it was via a boat and by sails. And it's also driven by the wind. So not just the wind, but also the tides. That's where the water moves. When the water moves a certain direction and you're trying to go against it, you better have a good amount of wind to get you over that tide. So if you hear about tides, which you'll hear, is the tide comes in at high water. That's where when you're at a beach, the water gets to a high point, that's high water, that's high tide. When it gets down to a low point, it's called low tide. So with this, when an explorer is trying to get somewhere, a lot of their travel is actually controlled by the tide. But these people are so well trained. Do you remember when we were talking about the ancient civilizations in the Americas? We said that their advancements were huge. They were so advanced for their time based on their survival. So what is it when somebody wants to become a sailor? What do they need to learn about? What are their advancements? It's most likely going to be on their survival. That's the first thing they do. Before entertainment, before being able to thrive, all these different things, they're going to study the tides and the winds. And this is essential to understand because you could be going west, and when you're hit by a strong storm, you could be going south by the time you realize it. Because, to tell you the truth, you're probably not looking at the compass as much when you're in a really strong storm and you're just trying to keep that sailing vessel straight. So, with all that understood, let's go into these three people who are very important to the discovery of the New World. Okay, so let's go to the first one, which is how our country got its name. Sorry, how our continent, the two continents, North America, South America, and Central. I mean, it's more put with North America these days, but it is basically its own entity. Okay, so let's go into Amerigo Vespucci. Now, Amerigo Vespucci, this is something really interesting to know. Where was Columbus born? I just was talking about Amerigo Vespucci. No. Where was Columbus born? Columbus was an Italian. He was born in Genoa, Italy. How in the world did he get to Spain and get the financing and the permission from Spain to go west? Well, if you know history, which is what we're here to teach you, during that time, Italy was very poor. They weren't the Roman Empire like they used to be. A lot of the different places were very poor, and a lot of the people that lived there went out across Europe trying to find employment. One, to bring money back to their families, or to do new things they would never be able to do if they were just staying in Italy. Now, in Italy, you could actually do some things because, again, there was still money there. There was still a government that was running, and you still had a lot of ventures that came out of Italy. But if you wanted to get the money to travel west, you needed someone right on the coast. You had the four main countries that were very important. Now, there were actually like 6 of them that discovered, well, 7 if you count Russia, but we're not going to get there yet. We will. Actually, Russia is actually part of this curriculum. But the 4 that were the most important, that made the biggest findings, discoveries in the age of exploration, would be Portugal, Spain, France, and Britain. So these 4 countries were all in a race as soon as Columbus went west. So Columbus was from Italy. Where do you think Amerigo Vespucci was from? Okay, so from my really bad accent, you could tell he was actually from Italy. Yes, another Italian explorer who was actually born in Italy. Okay, another Spanish explorer, or actually you could say a Portuguese explorer, or you could actually say somewhat both. So, this is the reason. Amerigo Vespucci, well, if I could say it right, Amerigo Vespucci was born in Florence, Italy, in around 1454. Now, they're not quite sure. They have a good understanding that it was probably around 1454, but records are not very prevalent back in that time. And then he died around 1512. Who was Amerigo Vespucci? He was one that traveled west after he found out what Columbus had discovered and what Columbus was able to do. So he went, the first voyage was actually not on his own. He was actually working for who? The Medici family. So in your expansion pack that you receive with this curriculum, you'll receive a card or a deck on, a card in the deck, in the expansion deck, on a Medici member of the family. Now, this Medici, and I'm not going to go into it because I want you to be able to explore it and find it in your deck, was based on one that funded a lot of expeditions. So the Medici family was a very wealthy family, and they were in Spain. They were in Seville. Now, the Medicis were actually like all over Europe because they were bankers, they were landowners, they did all these different things. They were philanthropists. They were very wealthy people, and they actually funded a lot of the expeditions that went west. So when Columbus went west, the Medicis were involved. When Vespucci went west, they actually asked Vespucci as one of their representatives to go with them. So they left in May of 1499. Now, he was going with Alonso de Ojeda. Sorry, again, I'm going to butcher some of these names. I apologize. But Alonso was traveling from Spain, Spanish, again, funded by the Spanish, from Spain into the New World. Now, where they landed was just, if you know South America, or if you know, sorry, I'm going to show this picture here, but if you know South America, you know Venezuela is right here. So you zoom in, there's Venezuela. They actually came from Spain, probably down the coast of Africa, and straight over from there to find, I think it was Venezuela, a little bit of Colombia, and started getting into the Central America, and then turned around. Now, what's interesting, let me show you a picture of Amerigo Vespucci so you can actually get an understanding of what he looked like. Okay, so this is Amerigo Vespucci. Not much to look at. If you go online, you can see what he looks like. But a normal gentleman at the time. Now, here's an interesting thing. So you remember how I told you that I was looking up all these different maps? Look at this. Disputed routes of Amerigo Vespucci. So, not true. So, disputed routes. Okay, so they can say, well, I said it was disputed. No, this is not disputed. There's no claims that he ever went up around the Gulfs, around Florida, and up the coast of North America. No one claims that. No historians claim that. I have not found a historian that claims that. Could he have? Okay, sure, he could have. Most of his historians that are out there could be wrong. It's less likely, though. It's very much less likely. But he went to Guyana, which is right below Venezuela. He went to Venezuela. He went up the coast and actually met some of the indigenous people in the area. And so, as he explored, he was able to find a lot of information and map down as close as possible that area. So let's go back to my map. I'm going to show you again. That's the map. But he started in Guyana. He actually reached there around June or July, and then traveled up through Venezuela around August. And then in September, they decided, you know what, we need to leave. Actually, no, wait a second. They sailed around the coast a little bit more during this time. And then they actually stayed in South America until June of 1500. Now, why'd they do that? Again, everything is controlled by the winds. After September, you have hurricane season. You have very strong winds and storms that come through. So you could chance it going back, or you could stay and explore this area. Because if you're in the coast, you're somewhat safe. So Vespucci, and again, not him, Alonso de Ojeda, it went exploring. And they explored the Venezuelan, around where Venezuela is, Colombia, Guyana, and such. The northernmost of South America. And then they left. They went home. What happened? They brought back valuable information, goods from the Native Americans and from just their own exploration. The biggest thing that they brought back were observations and maps that Amerigo Vespucci, a well-known cartographer, which means he drew maps, could actually write down. Now, his map was quite interesting, and actually, I had it, and for some reason, it's not my collection of images to show you. But his map was pretty close to what we have today. They didn't have much of North America on there. Actually, I don't think they had much of any North America up there. But they had South America at the top. So what happened? So Vespucci, again, he came back June 1500. Probably arrived somewhere around July 1500. So, of course, they couldn't leave because, again, by the time they got the money and the ships ready, it would probably be in the winter, and those have really strong winds. So, in 1501, the next year, so 2 years after he left, he sets off on his second voyage. And where does he go? This time, he's not with the Spanish. Instead, he's gotten the money and the help from the Portuguese. It's interesting because all these countries, Portugal, Spain, France, Britain, they all wanted it for themselves. They wanted this part and this piece. They wanted to expand here. And yet, because of what they did, you have 50 countries, maybe a little less, between South, Central, and North America. 50 countries that are able to have their own independence. Well, not as much. Some of them are still under the influence of Europe, but most of them were able to do this. So whether Vespucci was going with the Spanish, with Alonso de Ojeda, or he was going on again with a Portuguese captain by the name of Goncalo Quejodo, Quelojo, Coelho, Coelho. There you go. Goncalo Coelho. Gotcha. Okay, so that was great, right? Yeah. Okay. It was a try. So he arrived in about 1501 and then traveled around Brazil. So he landed in Brazil and then he conducted an extensive observation south from there. That's right. So he actually he'd already gone to Guyana and Venezuela, just north of it. He wanted to find out what was south of what he had already found. So he traveled down south, down Brazil, and into around the area of Uruguay. Did he actually make it to Uruguay? I don't think so. But the fleet sailed further south along the Brazilian coast, reaching Rio de la Plata. So this is another main area, not Rio de Janeiro, Rio de la Plata. Okay, so they were able to do all that expedition. Again, by the time they reached Rio de la Plata, Rio being river, they actually it was in December of 1501. So they had done so much exploring around Brazil that it became winter. I mean, very quickly winter. And at that point, it's not just the winds, it's the cold, it's the ice. You do not sail during the winter if you want to survive. Some people did. Most people did not. The amount of ice that was in the water, everything was just wrong to sail during that time. So in early 1502, the expedition continued south, possibly reaching all the way to Patagonia. Let's see if we can find Patagonia. Not on this map. I actually have to remember where it is, where Patagonia actually is. But yeah, down here in this area. Okay, so here's the point. In September of 1502, they returned. And what happened? They were able to get a little bit more money. They were able to get a lot more support because now they had maps. And they arrived back in Lisbon, Portugal. So his letters and voyages were sent abroad, but including was his maps. Now, what's significant about his maps is that he was actually able to, the map makers started taking those maps and looking at them. But I'm not going to get ahead of my story. So, third voyage. This is May 1503. Vespucci set sail on another voyage under another Portuguese captain, Portuguese flag. So this time he was going to focus on the Brazilian coast. He wanted more information. Now, at the same time, this time he actually discovers the bay of where? Rio de Janeiro, which is the capital of Brazil these days. Actually, I'm pretty sure it's the actual capital. Let me double check that because... Okay, so I'm going to type into Google, what is the capital of Brazil? And it will tell me that it is Brasilia, which is actually right here in the middle. Okay, so I was wrong. It wasn't Rio de Janeiro. It's actually one of the largest cities, though, Rio de Janeiro. But I knew that I wasn't going to be right, so I had to make sure I could check it. So this is a great reason for your own research. Check your research. Again, as I said, most of the maps online are wrong to where Amerigo Vespucci traveled. So very important to understand this. Okay, Now he returns in June of 1504. So 1 year later, he comes back. And he is able to, what? Provide his maps to everyone. A more detailed maps. Now this is significant because a map maker in Germany by the name of Martin Waldseemüller, Wald, so the W-A-L-D, Waldseemüller, published a world map named the newly discovered continent of America, based on Amerigo, honoring him for his findings, which is why we have the name America. Now, again, he found South America. Did not mean North America had to be under the same name, but they categorized the whole thing together, which is great for us. I love the fact that we have a connection with the people in South America. So there you go. So, who are some of the key people during this? Okay, so I told you about, now I know I told you to go explore, find the card of Lorenzo de Medici. So this is Lorenzo of the family of Medici. He's the one that helped was the patron of Amerigo Vespucci. Amerigo Vespucci did a lot of work for him and the Medici family. So that's great. Now, there's also Giovanni de Medici. So Giovanni from the family of Medici, who is actually the brother of Lorenzo. And he's actually the financier and political helper of Vespucci. Now, all these people work together to get this to happen. And so because of them, they were actually able to help with finding, to mapping and naming the Americas. Okay, so there's a lot of other people. I'm going to let you read through that. There's some great things to learn about, especially the archaeology. That's very fascinating because there's shipwrecks and things like that. Learn about the vocabulary, and there's, again, activities at the end of that curriculum. Okay, so let's go on to Pedro Alvarez Cabral. I'm going to get you a picture of him if you're watching the YouTube channel. This is the guy. This is Pedro. Again, where is Pedro from? Pedro is from Portugal. So Pedro, the reason why he's so important is because he was actually the one that was given credit for finding Brazil. Amerigo Vespucci did not find Brazil as much as he went there. Well, actually, you know what? I might actually have to. See, he was given credit for it, but it was 1500. Oh, that's why. Yes. Okay. So the reason why Cabral is given the credit for finding Brazil is because, remember, when Amerigo Vespucci came over, he found, first off, Guyana and Venezuela, and probably even a little bit of Colombia when he was exploring there. It was 1500 that he sailed back, never hitting Brazil. And so then, in 1501, what happened? Amerigo Vespucci came back to Brazil. Okay, but both, interesting enough, were Portuguese. Why were they Portuguese? Okay, so this is something that you really need to know. There is a treaty we're going to be talking about in just a little bit. There was a treaty written by the Pope to be able to make both Spain and Portugal work together instead of against each other, and having fighting, piracy, all these different things. So the Pope decided that he was actually going to work with them to separate the continents, to separate the exploration. So basically, the Spanish were given north of a certain line, and the Portuguese were able to travel south. Now, this allowed them to actually find Brazil because Brazil was under the line. This also gave them the ability to travel around the coast of Africa and find their way into India. So Cabral, and before Cabral, there was de Gama. Velasco de Gama was the man who was given credit for actually traveling around Africa and coming around to India. So his idea was, hey, there has to be a route to India via water, and they had not actually tried it. So Da Gama went south along the African border and found a route around the tip. Now, interesting enough, you have there two tides that are competing against each other, playing at the same place. So that place is very treacherous. You have the same thing at the bottom of South America, two tides hitting each other, winds extreme. And so a lot of ships sank in that area. I wonder how much they've actually done exploration off of that coastline. Probably a lot, because there's a lot of ships that are under there. But Pedro Alvarez Cabral, what's so interesting about him is that when he was traveling, he traveled from Portugal. He was traveling down the coast of Africa. And what happened? He hit a storm. And the storm sent him way off into Brazil. Now, that's a good distance. Let me bring that map up again. If you have a map, check this out. There's Brazil, and there's Africa. If you're traveling down the coast, you're going like 5 or 6 Spains away from where you're actually supposed to be going. So the wind blew him completely off coast. The tides completely off coast, which makes me think, it's like, wait a second. Did they know how to sail? Did they actually study those kind of waves and tides before they left? Probably, because things happen. Storms happen. Might have been a hurricane or other things. You never know. But what we do know is that he hit Brazil. And then from there, he stayed there for a little bit. So, and the treaty that I was trying to tell you about was the Treaty of Tordesillas. So, T-O-R-D, Tord, E, Silla, S-I-L-L-A-S. Silla, the double L is a Y. So, Lama, Yama. It's the Yama. So, Silla, Sias, Silas? Yes, the treaty. That one right there. Okay. So, Vasco da Gama actually traveled there in 1498. Now, Pedro Cabral got the great idea. It's like, well, if da Gama was able to travel around there and then come back, then I should be able to travel around there and get to India. So, again, he traveled down, made it to Brazil. He made it to Brazil in 1500, around April 1500, which meant he left fairly early. So it might have been a really good year that year. So he left early, made it to Brazil around 1500. Now, it was an accidental discovery. But at that point, then he traveled all the way back to the coast of Africa and to India, collected his goods, and returned home to Brazil. Now, interesting enough, the next person that would be fairly significant, that much, when it comes to finding a way to India, was Ferdinand Magellan. And that was over 20 years later. Or it was about 19 years later. So 1519 is when they left. They got there about 1521 and then finished returning to Spain in 1522. So, and by that point, 1520 is when Pedro actually died. So he was actually able to see Ferdinand Magellan's ship return. Now, again, sadly, without Ferdinand Magellan. And we'll go into that later on, actually, next week. Okay, so that is, bring it back up. This is Pedro Cabral. Very, very interesting person. There's a lot more to his story. So the way we basically separate these is we actually ask everyone to pick a story. Learn about one person. Don't spend the whole week trying to learn about all of them and then not memorize and not remember anything. Find one person that you want to learn. If you want to learn about Amerigo Vespucci, great. Learn about him this week. I mean, you could always learn about the other ones later on. Or if you're a fast study, learn about all of them. It depends on what you want. You could learn about Pedro de Cabral, or Pedro Alvarez Cabral. Or you can learn about the next one, which is very important, but not many people really putting emphasis on him, is Juan Ponce de Leon. Now, let me show you a little map before I go into Ponce. This is basically a recap of what he did. So he went out to the Canary Islands. Actually, the Canary Islands are closer to the African coast. Then he went to Cape Verde, which is actually closer to the African coast again. And then he went down to Porto Segura, and then came around Africa and traveled up African coast, and then came over to India. And then later on, he was able to return to Lisbon. So those were his two expeditions, his one expedition that he went on. So this was great. Pedro, very important. If you look, I've got an interesting map here. If you look at the little arrows on this map, if you're not looking, then sorry, this is on the YouTube channel. You don't have to read it. I'll actually explain it. So when you're coming down from Spain around the African coast, you'll see that the tides are actually pointing straight at South America. Those tides will actually push you straight towards South America instead of going around the Cape into following the coastline of Africa. So when you probably would want to travel straight down around the coast, if you know Africa, just picture the map of it, you'd actually have to travel around and take a lot of extra time to go around keep around the coast of Africa. So you can't really do that. Now this is a very old map because it even says that Ethiopia is lower than it actually was, but it shows you the tides, and that's what's most important. That's what I'm trying to show you. You also have the arrows pointing up, coming from the point of Africa, the lower southern point of Africa. They're pointing straight up. So if you're floating towards that, you have the winds and the tides pushing against you. So you actually have to catch the right winds. And so if you look below the Cape of Africa and all the arrows that are pointing up, going west from the Cape of Africa, you can see that the Arctic actually has arrows coming up as well. So what they did is they went down the coast of Brazil and they caught that other tide, which actually pushed them in the general area of the Cape of Africa. And then they slingshotted around that because the tides will then push you either further south and go straight east, or you'll catch the other ones that'll send you north and a little bit west towards the coast of Africa. So you basically sail up the coast of Africa, and then you have to come around. You don't want to actually go straight around Saudi Arabia and the northern part of that Gulf. You actually want to cut across straight to India because you have only a certain amount of time. So then you port in in India. You gather all your goods. Now this takes months sometimes because you have to find the right spice traders, and you have to be able to trade with them, negotiate with them, and then you have to bring it all on board. Now sometimes the types of spices that you're supposed to pick up are not always there, or are not always prevalent depending on the crops that year. So those things could always hold you back. But with Pedro Alvarez, Cabral, he was able to leave India, sail back along the coast of Africa, now competing against the winds and tides, and then come around Africa. And what happens when you hit the coast of Africa? Boom, it slingshots you up because the tides and everything are pushing you up towards the western part of Africa. And then you'll have to fight the very end to come around Africa and come up to Spain. But that's why you have the winds versus the tides. So Cabral had a lot of things fighting against him, but he was able to make it from Brazil all the way over to India and back home in one piece. So these were very important things. You'll actually learn in this curriculum, we actually talked to you about all the different routes you could have taken. And so this is also very important to look at, because there was overland routes. There was also maritime routes, which means the ocean. Now, the reason why they couldn't go over land, what happens? Again, looking at the map, you go through Europe, and where are you going to hit? You're going to hit the Middle East. The Middle East at this time is controlled by the Ottoman Empire, which has taken over all this land, and you either have to bribe someone to get through, you have to use political favors to get through, or you might just be taken and enslaved. That's just how it is. At this point, those in the Middle East, the Ottoman Empire, were trading slaves hand over fist. Not African slave as much, white slaves, white Christian slaves. During the Crusades, anytime they took someone prisoner, they turned them into slaves. Anytime they got someone that was going down through the Silk Road towards India that they didn't like, they were enslaved. There was a lot of slavery happening in the Middle East, but we're not going to be talking about that as much today. We're actually going to be talking about that on Wednesday, the second day of American history. And yes, we're talking about all of slavery because it's essential to understand in order to understand the transatlantic slavery, which we don't actually hit on very much right now until colonial life, which is next month, because that's when slavery really starts. Not really during the exploration, though there was a good amount that was happening in the Caribbean. They started taking slaves from Africa over to the Caribbean, but they were also enslaving the indigenous people that were there, so they didn't have to have the transatlantic slave trade at that point. They had indigenous workers that they can enslave. And no, I'm not saying this is good. I'm saying that that's what the Spanish did, and the Portuguese did. And Brazil actually had the most slavery in all of history when it comes to one single country. And there's still slavery down there today. Okay, but again, we're not going to talk about that until next time. But I'm not done. We've got one more person to look at. So now we've got these pictures. We got these maps. Let's go to the next person. Whoops, let me zoom out so I can actually move to the next one. This guy. Who is this guy? This guy is Juan Ponce de Leon. Juan Ponce de Leon was actually born he's a Spanish explorer. He was actually born in Spain. Santarvas de Campos. Santarvas. I have to actually pay attention to what I'm saying. Santarvas de Campos, Spain. I hope I'm not butchering that. I probably am. Again, apologies. Okay. The reason why Juan Ponce de Leon was so important is because he's actually given credit for discovering Florida. So let me go to his expedition, and this is the best map we have. A little bit off, but we'll work through it. This is a older map. Now, if you look carefully, you can see that it shows that his expedition started in the Caribbean. So not Cuba, not Haiti, not Dominican Republic. No, started down even lower, San Juan. Interesting enough, San Juan, amazing island. I traveled there. Great. It was actually my honeymoon when I got married. So this is nice because this actually shows you a little bit more of his expedition. Now, his expedition shows that he left San Juan and came up and traveled through the different islands of the Caribbean and then came up to Florida. Why did he travel to Florida? Well, if you read the curriculum, you'll actually find out that he was given information from the Taino people, again, the people that Columbus had actually met with. At this point, he was able to basically drop off, or sorry, he talked to the Taino people who told him about this great place up north where there was the Fountain of Youth. Now, a lot of people like to say that he was after the Fountain of Youth. That's what the reason wing was for his journey. But they could not be further from the truth. So, yes, I gotta say, people were fascinated by the story of the Fountain of Youth. But, funny enough, that was not exactly Juan Ponce de Leon. Now, he was a conquistador. He actually came from Spain. He was born in Spain, and he traveled across with who? This is very interesting. He traveled across as a conquistador, as one of the soldiers for Columbus on his second voyage, 1493. Second voyage to America. Columbus comes back with more soldiers to keep his people safe. And one of those soldiers is actually Juan Ponce de Leon. So his drive was he wanted to spread the Spanish influence. Now, yes, again, was there influence of the Fountain of Youth? Possibly, but is not 100% sure if that is actually the reasoning for him to do his work, to travel. And so he went up north. He traveled all the different islands trying to find this grand land where there's a massive piece of land that he could discover. Well, while Ponce de Leon never found the Fountain of Youth, he is given the credit for exploring as a conquistador and explorer the Florida coastline. And this is the lower Florida coastline. And funny enough, he actually thought it was an island at first. It was only later on that they found out that it wasn't. It's just like Columbus. He always thought that the places that he landed was Asia. But come to find out, even to his dying breath, he swore he saw Asia. Now, when did Columbus die? Let's see. When did Columbus die? I'm Googling this, Columbus die? Okay, Columbus died in 1506. Now, remember, a lot of the maps from Amerigo Vespucci were coming in around 1503, 1504. As you know, there's not a lot of information that gets around. I mean, it takes a while to get information around. So by 1506, and actually, I think the map was made in 1505 and 1506, and this is the map made by the German map maker who named it America. So at this point, Columbus still thought that he had found Asia, just like Ponce de Leon thought Florida was an island. So you can read through the curriculum. We actually give you a little history about the Fountain of Youth and Ponce de Leon's travels for the Fountain of Youth, like why, where he got the information, that kind of things, his motivations and such. But what's also really interesting in this curriculum, in this chapter, is that you can actually learn about some of the other tribes that were in Florida and what they did, what they were known for, their cultures and stuff, and things like that. Now, we also have a timeline, which is very interesting because you need to know about this. Not for a test, but for your own understanding. Again, you're going to hear all these things, and you're going to be the smartest person in the room. That's right. You're going to be the smartest person in the room because a lot of people have some weird understandings of history. And you're going to know all these things better than anyone else. Between the game, between the curriculum, between the podcast, and everything else we do, the activities and such, you're going to learn it. Okay. So one thing to know is he accompanied Nicolas de Ovando to Hispaniola, where they participated in the military campaign against the indigenous people, the Taino people. And this was in 1502. So Juan Ponce de Leon had not left yet. This was his early career. Now, Ponce de Leon was appointed as interim governor of Eastern Hispaniola. Now, Nicolas de Ovando was actually the governor who took over for, I forgot his name, the second governor that took over for Columbus. You're going to read it better, and you're going to probably remember these things. I'm old. Come on, all you guys listening. Gee whiz, we're getting old, aren't we? And the older we get, the more our memory slips. Just kidding. I've probably forgotten more about history than most people have ever known. So yeah, some of these names don't always catch on. This is why we don't memorize names and dates. We remember ideas and understanding. And yes, of course, we want to understand Christopher Columbus, Juan Ponce de Leon. He was important. Amerigo Vespucci, Ferdinand Magellan, de Gama, Velasco de Gama. People like this. We want to understand them. We want to know Queen Isabella. We want to know Hernan Cortez. All these different names are very important. So I knew I'd find it. No, I found his wife's name. Darn it. But it was Bobadilla was the second governor. His wife was Beatriz de Bobadilla. But Bobadilla, so, no, actually, Beatriz de Bobadilla was actually the daughter. Sorry, my story's mixed up. Beatriz de Bobadilla was the daughter of the governor, who again was captured, imprisoned, and shipped back to Spain for his false information that he was giving to the courts about Columbus, and then died in the hurricane after Columbus had predicted it. So Juan Ponce de Leon actually married his daughter, which is also very interesting to understand and know. So, okay, so going on. This is why Juan Ponce de Leon is very interesting to understand, because it's because of his travels that we were able to actually find Florida. Now, would someone else have found him? Yeah, probably. Someone else would have found Florida, but it was so important for him to actually make this journey so that we could actually have. Now, he founded St. Augusta, and then he came around, and that was on the eastern coast. Actually, this is where one of our sales reps actually lives, in this area, not St. Augusta, Augustine, sorry, St. Augustine, but in that area. But he then traveled around to the west coast of Florida. So he was actually able to map out a lot of this before leaving and coming back to the islands and such, and returning home. So there's a lot more in the curriculum. So please read through the curriculum. You're going to have a great time just exploring these things. But next time, when we get into next Wednesday's podcast, we're going to talk about something that's very, very sad for what it is: slavery. There has never been a good thing that came out of slavery per se. The only thing that we can say that could ever be considered a good thing is for all that they were able to develop. Not the people that enslaved them, but those that were the slaves should be given the credit for a lot of things that was able to be done. Is because of them, not because of the slave owners, but because of them that America became what it became today. Now, of course, the slave owners had some part in it as well, a big part. So it wouldn't have happened without them as well. So you cannot just give it to one person and not the other. What about people that were against slavery? Again, America would not have been established and become strong and get rid of slavery if it wasn't for those that were against slavery as well. So we should give them credit as well. But you have to also understand that it did not start in America. Actually, America was one of the last places. North America was one of the last places where slavery actually happened. It's what happened everywhere else that you need to understand, which is what we're going to go into on Wednesday. So I can't wait to tell you about it. Remember, tomorrow is about Africa. We're going to be going more into ancient Africa. Now, we talked about prehistoric Africa. Now we're going to be talking about the things they were able to do during that time. We're going to talk less about the Neanderthals or the ancient prehistoric people. We're going to talk about them, their technologies, their knowledge, the things that they learned. These are fascinating, but we're also going to talk about something that not many people ever talk about, and that's how the Sahara Desert, in theory, so it's a very good chance because the archaeological finds and historical finds was most likely green. It was green. It had trees, it had bushes, it had animals, it had people thriving there until something happened. But you're going to find out about that tomorrow. So if you are with the American history, you can just wait till Wednesday. Or if you want to hear about this really interesting finding in Africa, you can listen to our podcast tomorrow as well. So thank you so much for joining us, and we will catch you next time. Take care and have a great day. Bye. If you have any comments or questions, add them to the comments below. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow, actually. Take care. Bye.